Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. My name is Dr. Bravada Garrett-Akinsanya, and I'll be hosting for today. Our brother Baba Al McFarlane and his wife Bobby are celebrating their anniversary today, and I think he said it's about 50 years, so we want to do a shout out to him. As we talk about today, and you join us on this Friday, each Friday show is called The Healing Circle. And in this time, we set aside an opportunity to discuss the wellness of us as African Americans in this community. And we do it with a sacred way in which our ancestors celebrated life. We use what we call a circle. And although we are not in the same room together and it is virtual, we believe that we're in that same space. So the way the healing circle works is that each person in the circle has a chance to use the virtual talking stick. And we pass the conversation from one to another that way. We also are in this circle space because a circle holds a place of power for everyone. There's equal access to the center, which is seen as the circle's power. We honor our elders in the circle. And we honor them because they're closest to our ancestors. And we as African people, we honor our ancestors because they're closest to our Creator. Today, we talk about several things. And one of the first parts of the conversation I'd like to talk about is political advocacy. I had the opportunity yesterday to take a team of clinicians and parents and Brother Al McFarlane to meet people at the legislature. First, we went to talk to people who were in the Senate about providing services for the mental health, that means the mental health and spiritual liberation needs of Black children and their families. In that experience, it was very, very powerful because before us, there was another group of African Americans looking for money to support the Black baby projects that we're experiencing, knowing that Black women die very often more than any other group, depending on, regardless of their social economic status. We know that they die in childbirth. We know that their children have low birth weight and often die. And so if they were asking for money, they ran up against a lot of questions, one of which was that there was not a need to support culturally specific work. And through that process, we noticed that the people in the legislature, they had to be educated about what the difference is and why we need culturally specific services. Right after that, I'm going to tell you now. After that, we went later on to the House. And our little gang had a parent who was a very powerful speaker. She came and talked about how important it was for her to take her young Black child, who was 6 years old, to therapy because he was having a lot of behavior problems at school. And she would often cry and worry about whether he would make it, because for her as a Black parent, him not getting educated meant that he was in a struggle. And that struggle may lead to him being in the streets, in jail, or even dead. So his ability to learn to manage his affect and to involve his feelings when he's talking appropriately in groups, that was critically important for her. And she talked about learning that as a mother who brought her child to counseling. And when we went to talk then to the representatives' house, we also talked a lot about the role that they play in properly funding culturally specific services. We talked a lot about what that meant for us in terms of serving our children and our community who are always struggling with discrimination, microaggressions, the death of George Floyd, COVID. Our whole community has been suffering. And I know this African proverb that says, when a person doesn't go hunting when their own house is on fire. And we have plenty of houses that are on fire in our community. So today, one of the fires that we're going to approach in conversation is going to be the fire of education. Knowing that in Minnesota, they educate and graduate more than 85%, one of the highest rates in the United States of white students, with less than half of that being Black kids who graduate. About 40, I understand it gotten maybe to 50% of Black kids are graduating now, but the rate is still extremely low. So today we're going to talk about what it means for Black parents to express their liberation and their autonomy and their power by keeping children at home and schooling them. Joining us in this conversation is our brother, Dr. Oliver Williams, who would join us now to give his 2 cents about what's going on with our parents and what's going on with public education versus charter school, and just welcoming him to the program today. So Brother Oliver, I'm passing the talking stick to you.
Thank you, Dr. B. I wanted to say, I think that the topic is very important. As you mentioned, Eric Mahmoud does a good job of working with Black children in the community. And that's good. He has got a school that's focused on and targeted for them to develop skill sets to sort of improve their chances of graduating and doing well in school. I think of Juanja Kanjufu, who is a brother that did a lot around education and looking at the challenges to young Black kids and talking about when they're likely to experience some challenges in school. I think they said the second grade was one place where Black kids ended up dealing with different challenges. But another person who had been doing a lot of great work in the city of New York is a person that started dealing with young men and violence. His name is Jeffrey Canada. And Jeffrey Canada has a Harlem project that worked with kids who were coming from homes that didn't have the structure within the home, but also didn't have the capabilities in terms of the educational environments, and making sure that the kids, could do really, really well. Thank you. And so we worked on a project that was called together by the Jeffrey Holder when he was the Attorney General, where we had an event where we brought together people who were thinking about those issues to reduce the violence for kids who were dealing with the different challenges and trying to talk about how the domestic violence community could be responsive around those sets of issues. And they had some of his staff come in and have conversations with us about dealing with these sets of issues. So, and the other thing I liked was the fact that he ended up spending time dealing with violence generally and had done some good work around that, but specifically around how do you improve the school environment. And there was another woman, African-American woman in Chicago, and I can't think of her name at the moment, but she ended up doing something, but again, it wasn't so much in the home only, it was in the school environment, and ended up getting not only the structure of the school, but also the involvement of the parents to engage with the well-being of the children. And the thing I think about is that not every parent has a skill set to be able to do homeschooling with their children, either in terms of education of the children or in terms of, there was an article that we were provided that gave some examples about schools that were doing it and parents that were doing it. But when I looked at it, I said, this is really focused on little ones and wasn't focused as much on young people as they got older. And I think you've got to have both those skill sets. And if you're going to work with educating your kids, but also putting them in an environment where they can be supported. Although, in reading that article, the intentions of the parents I totally understood. You know,
What do you see as one of their main intentions from reading the article? What did you perceive were the primary goals of the parents stating that they wanted to, to homeschool their kids? Why would they want to do that?
well, what I got from it was also, and maybe I was, dealing with my own challenges when I was a kid growing up, is that you want to see yourself in the environment that you're getting the services provided. So you want the people who are the teachers and the people who are the administration understand the world of the child that you're dealing with.
Mhm.
Excuse me. And I'm not sure that everybody had that.
Mhm.
I know I went to a Lutheran elementary school and went to a Lutheran high school. So the elementary school, had done a report, and one of my classmates back then sent me this flyer that talked about the fact that St. Philip's Lutheran School was the one school that ended up providing support for African American children in the city of Detroit. Very true. There's also a program called Berea, which was another Lutheran school that was kind of African American focused. But St. Philip's was identified. And then and they weren't integrating those schools, and these were Lutheran schools back in the day. So the thing that was interesting was the fact that when we got to high school, they weren't. Lutheran West was doing something to engage with high school students that were Black, but Lutheran East wasn't.
Wow.
And of course, they sent me to Lutheran East. My mom wanted me to go to Lutheran East. So we were integrating the school, and we started with 16 Black kids that went to Lutheran East, and we graduated 3.
Wow. Well,
So,
that sounds very different than similar and different than my experience. I grew up in the South in Texas, and of course, during Jim Crow, we were segregated. And one of the things that happened is my mom was a teacher at school for many years. My dad was the janitor there. He was a construction man. So we had parents at school, and the school was Black. Everybody was Black, the teacher, the principal. And I noticed that they did not have low expectations of us. They did not have ideas that we couldn't succeed. In
right,
fact, they had just the opposite. They they saw in you visions of what your capacity was and what you're capable of, and they didn't let us slack at all. And I was lucky that I was in a segregated school so that I could have my Black face reflected in people that I saw were brilliant, of authority, who were kind, who were in control of things. It was healthy for me to have that as a background. We stayed integrated until I went to the 5th grade. And that was the first year that I was in an integrated school. And I noticed they had all kinds of new things, weekly readers and all kinds of stuff. And different, we had little mouse, mascot in our class. The teachers would do reading. So it was a good experience, but I grew up in a very rural community. So they didn't have but one school. After they had the integrated, the school I went to called De La Plains, they made that the shop. So everybody who's taking shop classes goes to De La Plains. But after that, they couldn't teach the white kids without teaching us. But we did experience racism as each area as we went up. We saw it, and sadly, it was normalized. We didn't realize that things could be different in that era. So when
yeah,
we think about parents now, like the ones you're describing, choosing to take their kids to homeschool, I think they're doing it out of protection.
Oh yeah, yeah. And it was interesting when I went to St. Philip's. We had teachers there that would do things to not only embrace us, but we had a teacher, Miss Foston, and one of the things that she would say, she would always say, "You children are the descendants of kings and queens."
Wow.
Which meant a lot.
Yeah.
And
That's powerful.
and continue to encourage us. And we wanted to do better for certainly our parents and for ourselves, but we had some pride in the school that we went to.
Yeah.
When we went to uh, this Lutheran East and some of the other schools that were there, people had to negotiate, the landmines. It was an environment where it was sort of like DeSantis that wanted to deny the fact that there were differences and pretend like it didn't exist, when their whole way of operating in the world was they wanted to get you to think that they were better than you were. I think I may have shared this with you, but I had a classmate that found me on LinkedIn or Facebook. I don't know how he got it, but he got it, and he contacted me. And when we were kids, we were on the same wrestling team, and he wanted to get together. He wanted me to go fishing with him. He wanted to, develop, reestablish or establish a relationship. And so I, communicated with him. But then he saw my feed, and he was a Trumper. And it was bizarre to me that he contacted me in the first place. But when he wanted to continue sort of spouting these crazy things, I asked him to lose my number, lose my Facebook page, and don't be in contact with me anymore, because the things that he was saying it didn't make any sense whatsoever. But the thing that was interesting to me too was the fact that it validated. Sometimes when you're going through those experiences as a child, you say, well, was that real, or was that my child frame on what I saw? And what it did was it validated me in terms of saying, well, it was real,
Yep.
and the craziness that existed. I mean, there's a lot of stories you could tell about that, but I don't want to expose my trauma any more than it was.
I hear you, brother. Similarly, and I think when I think now then about the article and what Black parents are doing to try to minimize that harm to their kids.
Right. That's
that right. When you look at systems that are just filled with people who don't look like you or your family, they don't have the cultural competence, knowledge, or even interest,
right,
to have to learn to work with you and your kids differently. We know that, for example, Black kids, they learn better kinesthetically. So when we are really teaching our children to do things, the things we learned were either with music or movement or something like that. And it fits very comfortably with us culturally, because that's the way we roll. The other thing I've seen is some good examples here, though. Like We Win Institute helps academically. Brother Gene Ford over there with NetCAD, this Network for Children of African Descent, and he does parent literacy, as you know. We have Dr. Katie Sample. I don't know if she's still doing the African American, I think, education leadership school. And then we have now, when we talk about looking at Dr. Canada, we have the NAS, the Northside Achievement Zone, that is trying to achieve some of the same and emulate the same principles. So a lot of the people in the community are trying to find out ways to get Black kids educated. And we want more. We want any people in the audience who are listening to join us right now on Conversations with Al McFarlane. We want you to subscribe to our YouTube channel or subscribe to receive notifications when we are live. We ask you to join us at youtube.com at Insight News MN. So we ask you to join us and to send any notices or conversational items that are hitting you today to just join our conversation. And we ask you to continue to support us as we kind of increase our viewership, and we go through the community just bringing this great news about not just politics, but possibilities. So just wanted to make sure I gave that shout out to community. What I'd also like to do is talk a little bit more about these parents. I have a couple of colleagues that I talked to earlier who I was hoping would be able to join us. They're both one's a marriage and family therapist and another's a psychologist. So I wouldn't say that all parents are marriage and family therapists or psychologists, but even they had decided to homeschool their children. And one of the reasons is that they were seeing that a lot of educators have low expectations,
Right.
and I don't know if you remember that movie Aquila and the Bee.
Mm-hmm.
But where the little girl was learning to spell all these big words, and the teachers were giving her simple words that were like first grade words, and she was spelling better than college students or professors. Right. So I think I'd like to talk a little bit more about what do we see as why Black parents take this back as a sign of their activism against a system that's not caring for them. What are your thoughts about that, Dr. Oliver?
Well, I think that the thing is that your parents want the best for you, and I mean, even back, in the day, the intention was to have you go to a school that provided an educational environment for you so you could do well. But it was also dealing with social justice. The schools had a responsibility of being able to provide that support for their kids. And so when my mother encouraged me to go to these different schools, she was clear that it had a lot to do with social justice. And if that was a place where you could get a supposed better education, then you should go there, not to places where they didn't have the books, they didn't teach the topics, they didn't expose you to different opportunities. You needed to go to the place where they did do that. And so that's what she did. But there were also things that happened in the school where you would do poorly on a test, but the people who did better than you copied off your paper. And the question was, how could they get a better grade when they were copying everything that you had put down? I mean, that happened to me. And so what we did was we went to the school and confronted the teacher. And my mom and my sister, my older sister, went to confront this teacher, and she kept ducking us every time we went there. And then to the point where we said that we were going to call the newspaper and bust them out. What? With regard to that. Yeah. And so they didn't want any of that. So what she wanted to do was to be able to give me a grade that was C+, no lower than a C+. And nobody was asking for that. They was saying, give me a grade that I deserve.
Yeah.
And or dealing with racism where you become a victim in a situation. I remember being in high school, and I was a top athlete in the school, and I would do something. I would behave normally, but kids were my classmates were maybe annoyed by the fact that I could excel at something that they couldn't. And then you'd have the class jump on you. And thank goodness I was a good enough athlete that I could, make them pay for that. But that's not what you want to do. That's not the situation you want to be in. And the other thing was the fact that there were some kids that were trying to be decent, and there were some people that were clearly decent, and their parents were clearly decent, but there were so many more that weren't decent. And I ended up being vice president of the student council, and to do that, and to also be vice president of my class. But to do that, one of my classmates, who was very decent, ended up confronting her classmates about their racism. And so those are things that if I had gone to an all-black school, and when I went to an all-black school, I had to deal with that.
That's right.
And so, but there are things that you have to negotiate. And at the end of it, my friends Reginald and Reginald became a fighter pilot. That was his dream, all along. And he ended up being a fighter pilot in the Navy, and then ended up being flying for the airlines afterwards. But we talked about, and then our friend Ronnie, who passed away a few years ago, we would talk about the things that we experienced as kids.
Wow.
And how we negotiated dealing with those things. So,
Brother Oliver, I need to talk and stick because I'm about to have church up here with you.
okay.
Like you said, it's almost your lived experience is so similar to mine. I can barely believe it.
Right.
As I said, I grew up in this rural town in South Florida, Texas. And I remember writing papers, turning them in, and getting bad grades. And I know I can write. Right. My mother was an English teacher. She correct your grammar when you're talking.
Right.
She'll say it again. Say, what is it? And so I knew how to write, and I knew how to use the English language very well. So I would write papers, and the woman would consistently give me B-, C, C-. And one time when I finally did get close to one of the white girls who was always making A's.
Right.
She was, her parents were very rich, and she was always making A's. And I knew that my papers were, and I'd read hers, and they didn't sound any better than mine. And so we switched papers. We were in high school. We finally switched papers, and I'll never forget it. She got my paper back with an A. I got hers with a C-. That's when we confronted them. And the teacher had to go back and redo all of my grades because she had really cheated against me. And I'm so shocked to hear the similar thing happen. And same for me. I was very athletic. I could run so quickly. You know how they make you do the bleachers and make you run around in the gym. And the teacher would say, do 5 laps, and then you can go to the shower. Would I do my 5 laps or go five times up in the bleachers? But sometimes I'd be coming when they going when they coming back. I'd meet them, and I'd get through ahead of them. That I was the only one in the locker room for about 5 minutes.
That's right,
at least, because I had beat them. Now, if it had been a black school, the teacher would have said, "Oh, this girl's got talent. She can run.
That's right.
Let me see if I can nurture that or put her in track or something."
Right.
And they didn't do that.
Right.
The same thing with my sister Lisa. She was an excellent golfer. We didn't belong to any golf club, so she had to practice making holes in the yard and wherever she had to do. And she was just this close to winning the state tournament.
Wow.
But the coach of the golf team, her daughter played golf, and so she assigned her daughter to go before my sister.
Wow.
So and we still talk about how we lived through racism, and how we didn't often tell our parents enough for them to stand up for us. How we took matters in our own hand, except with my grade when it got switched, and I was really, really angry. Even the white girl told her mama,
Right.
So we had to go tell it, and
Right.
she had to change it. But you're really talking about what that means. So if this is still going on and you're a black parent, you're gonna feel like you have a right to
That's
keep
right.
your child at home. And unfortunately, like you said, everybody's not a teacher.
Right.
Every parent can't do that.
Right.
And so that's when they talk about charter schools.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because charter schools are they're thought as if they're their own school district. So
Right.
each charter school is its own school district.
Right.
A lot of times, when money comes from the state or other entities, they don't want to give it to charter schools. They want to give it to public school. But
Right.
to me, charter school is kind of public if you're somebody of color or need a kind of specific type of service.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm just really understanding some of this. When I hear this from you, now I kind of know some of the cloth you're made of and
Right.
why you have to be like you be.
Right. Well, you remember Dr. James Jackson, who's at Michigan? I asked the University of Minnesota brought him up here. I recommended him to be a visiting professor, and he came and spent some time with us. I think about a year. But you'd hear some of the stories that he would tell, and so as they were talking about when children get challenged by things and they make these assumptions that children are not doing as well and won't do as well. So James he passed away, but
Yeah.
when he was he would go to France every year. And they had, he started the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan and helped students of color, whether they're Native American or African American or Latinos, learn how to do research and do research within their own communities. So, but he talked about, so he'd go to France every year and he'd take their children. The children spoke French as little ones and were brilliant, kids. Then his child was in the second grade going through things, and one of the things that happened was there was a teacher there that saw the child, didn't know who the parents were, and ended up trying to label this child as deficient. They did it to the wrong person. And so the thing of it is that this child was brilliant, was excelled in everything, but they made these assumptions about not only children but parents, and to see how nobody had better skill sets than James Jackson, and in terms of how he would deal with things and address things and knew how to do specific things, and being able to confront those different sets of challenges that children go through, and have that support. So what I do like, and I can't think of the name of this teacher that developed this similar to the Harlem Zone in New York, but did it in Chicago. They even did a TV movie about her, and the structures that existed to not only help the children excel, but to get families to commit to being support of the children and making sure that they would track the children and doing better. In the article that we got yesterday, it talked about the frames and how the support systems could exist and how you could draw on different things. But, not every community has that. So on the one hand, I'm clearly in support of what they're intending to do. But, I think that we have to find school systems and charter school systems and public school systems that will support children. I had a friend whose parents were brilliant. She was adopted from Liberia, and they really raised her and her brother. He went to the Air Force. So he went to West Point, and she went to Wesleyan. But that was the support system that they could provide. And she graduated valedictorian from this public school. And I went to school with her one day. And I'm thinking to myself, it had to be the parents that did it, because it was an inner city school in the city of Detroit. And she excelled, but not everybody around her excelled. And for me, I did the best I could with what I had, but the person who was supporting me was really my mother and my father by proxy. But my mother was deep in it, in the weeds, trying to make sure that I did better and would find schools and places and programs for me to get better at what I did. That's why that phrase by Booker T. Washington, success should not be measured so much by the achievement that one has attained as much by the obstacles that one has overcome in order to achieve. And so that's what I think of. And that had been sort of my mantra, all along, is the fact that you can do it if you had the opportunity to do it. And if you got supported to be able to do it, then that's something that was really important.
So you bring up another piece that I think is very relevant to this conversation. And one of them is, how do we construct or resurrect or reconstruct, even though it may initially appear artificially, a community that is there to surround young learners, and even those all the way up to graduate school, anyone trying to learn. But how do we construct that, and what are the pathways to get community engaged in a point that nobody has to educate their child alone, and no one has to hold all of that power and responsibility alone, that it can be shared? Do you have any ideas about that? Because one, let me just say this before I give you the talking stick. One idea I have about it is that sometimes we have to almost artificially create that. And we do that through programs like the one I have called Project Marua. It's called Premeditated Parenting Boot Camp. And the motto is, we think before we act with knowledge, and we fight with conviction. And what those parents do, they believe that their job is to prepare their children to be well in all their areas of life. And we have one whole module on academic wellness. And some of the things that comes out of that is parents will say, it reminds me of Medea, I don't know nothing about that algebra. That new algebra. But what it did come out of it is that there are parents who had high school kids or other aunties or uncles who didn't know about that algebra and who could help their kids to learn. So when we created that program, the parents were able to share resources with one another, and they became a larger community of support, asking for, because one of the missions of the program is to teach Black parents to give and receive support.
Right.
And so if you can't ask for help, then you can't give it. And so in that whole process, we had tests that the parents would have to take, and the test would the first thing they do in the first session is a post measure about the topic. And the first thing you do, the first class, they're doing this in front of their papers, so nobody's looking. And that's the white way of learning, of course, that's called stealing or cheating when you share knowledge with someone.
Right.
And so we think about parenting. Right. Parenting is something you should never do alone. That's why it's biologically impossible to have a baby by yourself. Somebody needs to help you. Right. And so they and as they go through the test from the first session up to the 10th session, you see how efficient they get at organizing support, asking for support, giving support. One, it might be a circle of 7 parents, and one say, we'll take questions 1 and 2, we'll take 3 and 4, we'll take 5, and then everybody's shouting out their answers in the time, and it's so efficient. And they learn how to give and receive support. So I'm just putting that out there as one of the models that we can perhaps superficially create and help people rejoin. But you talk a lot of times about churches. And I'm just wondering, when you think about that, is how could they be a part of that artificial rekindling of what it means to be community actively in educating kids? I'm going to
Well,
pass.
I think that's important. As matter, when back in the day, not only it was like your parents were a part of it, but it was your environment. That St. Philip's was a part of it, and in terms of they wanted to see us do well in the school that was predominantly white, because they wanted to make sure that other kids that were coming through were going to do okay. Um, there were other students that followed later, but what was interesting, our class was like the largest class, and everybody else seemed like they got uh, um, nudged out. But when you have different places and the parents come together and talk to each other and talk to the schools, and then you have the students that get together and talk with each other and talk to the schools. But then you have the churches and the places where students were being referred. My understanding was the reason why they ended up selecting us to come is because they were concerned that their funding was going to get chopped. And so, before they weren't, it would have been better for me to go to Lutheran West, because I lived on the west side of Detroit, instead of going to Lutheran East, which was bus rides away because it was out in the burbs. And so, Lutheran West was in a burb too, but it was closer to where I grew up. And that what motivated them is they didn't want to get their funding cut. And then for us, my mother, she saw that there was an opportunity to encourage us, and then they would provide some supports for us to be able to go to the school, because you had to pay to get to those different programs, but we went through, and we succeeded. Where some of my colleagues, or classmates, decided to go somewhere else, that in the school within their neighborhood that ended up providing supports. But some of those people were brilliant. Some people became air traffic controllers, and some people became physicians, and some people, of my classmates. But Reggie and Ronnie and I wouldn't go. And we said that we're going to, make our stand here. And then at the end, I remember I said something, because they had students, say something at the end, and I said something that was controversial, that confronted them about their isms and stuff. And even this young man that, or I guess he was an old man like me now, remembered that and wanted to know what that was about. And I'm thinking to myself, they didn't know what it was about back then. And but basically getting parents and children to be together, to be supports for one another, and then to be able to identify the people who could be supports for you in that environment. I think the thing for me back then was the fact that I didn't realize that it would take all that. And there were some students who, because I think of the one person I was telling you about that became a physician. His mother was a teacher, and she was a STEAM teacher in the community, but he left. And so we weren't going to go. They could try to push us out if they wanted to, but we also had the civil rights movement behind us that would taught us about what our responsibilities were, and other schools that were being integrated. Back then, one of the things that was happening is that there would be turmoil in some of the public schools because they didn't want to have black kids go to those schools. And so we weren't going to be any have less fortitude because we were going to this church school. We were going to continue to go and to achieve. And we did. I mean, we really did. And there were some teachers in that school too, with Mrs. Miller in particular, I can think of, who was a wonderful teacher. And she was very supportive. And then her two sons, you know, who were classmates of ours, one a year ahead of me and one a year behind me, were really, really good people. And
So you,
I'm sorry, brother.
I was going to say, so you see, I love what you said a moment ago about we decided we would take a stand.
Right.
So even as kids, you were social justice advocates, and you were warrior teens trying to make sure that nobody pushed you around or got rid of you. And it really hits me in a couple of ways. One is that that's a glorious example for our young people to know that they have the power to stand, and that they have support to stand, because some of them, they don't have that belief. The other thing I was thinking about as you were talking about that is, how do we help kids nowadays who are seeing that their brothers and sisters are dropping out, or who are not seeing success around them, but they also need to take a stand. So I'm now thinking about, as you're talking, the thing that flew through my mind is, you're a parent and your kid's in a school that's not treating them well, and it is integrated, and you're going, okay, we're here now what? How do we make sure that they get treated well? What are some strategies we need to put in place to help our babies stand when they need to stand? Because what they're going to find out is, when you leave school, most of the time in America, at least where I've been, you're often the only one of only or few of. The higher you go, the more lonely you become, and the less people around you look like you, believe like you. And how do you find allies? So those are two or three pieces I think that we could talk about right now if we were to sit with a group of parents, just given our own history and our own experience. Let's think about what advice we would give a parent, or some parents who are sitting there, and we know what their kids are going through, and we remember, and like many people, we've spent part of our life trying to be problem solvers of people who are experiencing a lot of emotional pain around life circumstances. That's what we have done with our lives. So how would we go about telling parents? What would you think would be some of the first 2 or 3 tips you would like to give parents in that condition?
One is, and I also saw this in the article that we got from CNN. They found resources that existed within their community. We had to do that. My mother had to find it. My sister was a very bright woman, and so she could help. But we also found other supports that existed within the community, after school programs, teachers who were in public school who were Black teachers that wanted the best for their kids, and found ways to develop summer programs and year-long programs for Black kids, to be tutored or to be informed and educated, even though it was a long trip to get to places that could be supportive. And I was a jock, but my senior year, I broke my ankle. And so I got a chance to, during football season, get back and then go to some of those programs. And then you found supports not only for that, but when you were transitioning to college, some of these advocates, these teacher advocates, who were in the educational system for the city, could be supports for you and help you through things, like even reading that, helping you to try to be prepared to submit an application for college. I mean, I got offered scholarships. I ended up going to Michigan State on a wrestling scholarship. and I was much thinner then, and so but one of the things that happened was, and then I played football, and so uh, there were high school or colleges that were interested, small colleges that were interested in me playing college football for them. And my uh, football coach held back the applications and the letters, because but one of the reasons why I love Michigan State so much is that my uh, wrestling coach at Michigan State was very, very supportive. And he was supportive when I was in high school, and encouraging me to, because Michigan State was the only college that I wanted to go to. I went there when I was 5 years old, when they had when I was in public school in the city of Detroit, and they took us up there to take a look, and I saw Sparty, and I was real impressed. They took us to the student union and all that, and so I was only interested in Michigan State. And
That's
then,
beautiful. I love that story.
oh yeah,
I love this. You met Sparty. You were hooked. See,
I was hooked.
so then one of the things you're really talking about, Brother Oliver, is that we need to give children what Black psychologists refer to as mind models.
That's right.
And they may not even have a person that's close to them, but in their mind, they can either read about the person or meet the person, and they can look at the values that it takes to get there. I often think about what it would be like to take kids that young to a college campus, and what that would be like for them to think about, I could go to this school, maybe even give them a hat or something from the school, and see what difference that would make to which schools the kids chose.
Right.
And to hear you say that today, this is so exciting because because we need to figure out how to get them young, right? Get them excited about learning, excited about opportunities, and to teach them that they can do something. My mom, I don't know if I told you, but she taught 44 years before she retired.
Wow.
And what she did, by the time she finished teaching, she had taught in one school building where she had all the grades all the way up to where we integrated. Mm-hmm. But one thing she always did that I talk to teachers about when I get to do any training or anything like that in school related issues, is she would go every year before school started, and she wasn't a famous cook, but she would make something like Jiffy cornbread muffins. Mm-hmm. They were just delicious and buttery, and so she'd make this recipe of buttery muffins, and she would make a whole bunch of them. And she and my younger sister Lisa, we'd pile up in the car, and she'd go by her school roster. They used to have black books then, and they put your name and your grades across mm-hmm. from it, and right, because they didn't have a computer. So so we would go from home to home, talking about the kids that my mom was going to teach. And she would ask, like one home we went to, I think it was the plumber. And you would have thought he was going to live in a raggedy house. Oh no, he had a two-story house, big, with glass doorknobs. And I said, what? Because now I think about it, plumbers make a lot of money. They may stink when you see them, but when they get home, and cash their checks. So we went to his home, to this white man, went to his home, and she thought about teaching his child, and she asked him, and his wife, she said, what is your vision for your child? Mm. And how can I as a teacher help you get there? Mm. And then we go to another house, and I'll never forget this day. We went to another house, and that person had an outhouse. They were very poor. You drive up in the car, you can smell the outhouse. Right. And you go in, it was relatively clean, but it was, it was poor. They were very poor. Right. And this was all in Florida. And my mother would sit there, the woman, I'll never forget, it was one lady who had offered her some foods, and we took the muffins, and she thanked us for them. And we sat there, and I remember the the young man, his name was Raul, and his mom was talking about how he doodled all the time at school, and she was worried he would never graduate, and that nobody in their family had to graduate from high school.
Right.
And so my mom sits there and says, "What do you want for your son, and what is your vision for him?" And she said, "I just want him to graduate, because he doodles all the time." And I'm sick. And my mom said, "Well, you can make a living drawing. They have architects, cartoonists, and do you know?" By the time my mom had died, that young man came to her funeral with a coat and tie. And he said, "If it wasn't for Miss Garrett, I would never have graduated. And I'm an architect in San Antonio.
Wow.
And my name is Raul, whatever his last name was." And I couldn't believe it, because I remembered she had done that with him.
Right.
And so I know that the power of naming it, the power of giving people permission to care about our children and to own the power that comes from being models for them is so critical. I know we got maybe one or two more minutes to go before the show, but I'd like to get just your last words about what you would like to tell parents. You hit on so many points today, but what would be your advice now?
Well, I talked about Miss Foster, but in the public, I went to public school, went from kindergarten to third grade, and there was a teacher there named Mrs. Felton, who was also like a Mrs. Foster, who believed in you, and I mean, they were tough.
Wow.
But they believed in you.
So your advice then, is it that you would tell parents to find people who believed in your kid?
Yeah. And those people are apparent.
That's
They exist in the world, and people know who those people are.
They do.
So people who are on the side of your children and want to be supportive of them, and tell them the best things about who they are, and not to do like DeSantis and want to deny that it exists.
Thank you, brother. I know our time is up.
Yeah.
And I want to just once again tell people to join us for Conversations with Al McFarlane. This conversation went so quickly. We could talk another 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
And we just want people to know that they can subscribe by on YouTube, at Insight News MN. They can see us also on Facebook Live. And we just want to say once again, thank you all for coming and hearing from me and brother Dr. Oliver Williams. And our hope and dreams for you is that you will be well, and you and your family will be well. And join us again at the Healing Circle with Conversations with Al McFarlane. Goodbye.